Welcome, all my friends and everyone interested in this ancient text called the Bible and the resurrection of Jesus Christ. I have a guest with me, and we're going to be talking about just that. Stephanie. Actually, my wife says Mrs. Dad Jokes, because we've had your husband on here, and he's done some dad jokes with us, and he's been on a couple episodes, Nick. Before we get into talking about the Bible and Jesus, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Well, I just found out today that I am Mrs. Dad Jokes. So
right.
I do like that. I'll go with that. But about me, I am a wife. I'm a mother. I work full time as a manager in healthcare. So definitely stay really busy. Mm-hmm. I am very family oriented. So my hobbies really just include spending quality time with family and friends, and love reading. So Bible is a good place to start.
Yeah. Like whenever we hear about like your journey through the Bible, I get so excited because reading's hard for me. And you're like, oh, check out this devotional and check out this other thing. I'm like, yes. Oh, that's great. I can't do that. But yeah. Tell us a little bit about your like journey into faith.
Sure. So growing up, I have pretty much grown up always believing in God. We went to church kind of intermittently. It was always up to us as the kids to, really decide if we wanted to continue with church, what worked for us and whatnot. So, always believed in God. I found that I really got more into believing in Jesus specifically through the COVID pandemic. So a lot of at-home time was spent there. And there are moments in my life as an adult where I knew that he had been moving in different ways for me, whether that was keeping people in my life, moving people out of my life when I needed it. Either way, I just knew he was always there, one way or another. So during the pandemic, that actually allowed my husband and I to grow even closer to him, which was awesome. And we found ourselves being drawn to home church, or house church, however we.
Right, I get crap for that. So yeah. I don't know
house
what
church,
it is.
Church in people's homes.
Right.
But we just felt like we hadn't really found a church that we belonged to necessarily. So house church was where we felt finally at peace. Like, okay, this is where we are meant to practice our faith and become even closer to God and Jesus. So we started house church, haven't gone back, and I love reading. So yes, I do read lots of different devotionals now. I think I'm in 2 different devotional books, and then I even look at an app that I read every day too. So different avenues of faith.
And then my wife actually baptized you.
Yes. June 23rd of last year.
Was it last year?
Yeah, it was last year. So
2022.
Yes. So during that time, there was a lot of heaviness that I felt, a lot of weight that I felt on my shoulders. And I think one of the afternoons when you had just gone on a trip, you came back from a trip and we're talking about baptism.
Oh,
and it was almost like a light bulb clicked in my head where it was, this is what I need. This is exactly what I need right now. So
cool.
Pretty soon after that, got baptized by your amazing wife. So
she was on one episode, and so we call her Mrs. Dumb Christian.
Okay. So Mrs. Dumb Christian baptized Mrs. Dad Jokes.
Right.
But yeah, and it's been a pretty amazing experience ever since then. So it definitely makes a difference, and it's been awesome.
Yeah, no, for sure. And so it's been a couple weeks, and I felt like, man, I need to do just like a special edition Dumb Christian with Easter right around the corner. And I just felt like the Lord really placed it on my heart, and I was praying. I was like, who am I supposed to do this with? And I was just like, man, you've been so like into it and like discovering stuff. I'm like, well, she's probably a good candidate. So she reads a lot. Maybe she'll have something to say about it. So what I want to do, and the way we've kind of planned this is we're gonna try and take like a broad stroke view of about a week before Jesus's death, the 3 days he's in the tomb, and then what's going on after the resurrection. And this, depending on how long this goes, it might be a two-parter. But basically where we were thinking about starting is, I guess let's go John 11, because that's where Jesus resurrects Lazarus from the dead. Lazarus is one of his best friends. That's kind of the illusion that we get from Scripture. He's sick. He gets word that his friend is sick, and he says, we're going to wait. We're not even going to go heal him from being sick. He dies. Jesus finally shows up, and he's been dead for 4 days. Lazarus has been dead. Lazarus' sisters, Mary and Martha, are like, Jesus, what the WTF? You could have healed this guy. And he's like, chill, bro. I got you, fam. And raises Lazarus from the dead, which is actually kind of like the turning point where the Pharisees who have already hated Jesus, they're like, oh shit, things are getting out of hand. He's raising people from the dead. The word is spreading across the land. They're like, we have to shut this guy down now. Okay, so that's kind of like going on in the background. There's this plot that begins. We have to find someone who will betray Jesus. So if you don't know what's coming down the line, someone's going to betray Jesus. Spoiler alert. But in the meantime, they throw this massive party because Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead. Lazarus, I think, was a really popular guy in town. They have a massive party, piñatas and a fondue. What's the cheese fountain?
Yeah. It's not queso. Maybe. I'd have queso if it was my party.
a queso fountain. Right. They have this massive party, and something really significant happens during this party.
Yes. So during this party, a woman approaches Jesus and has like a bottle in her hand and pours it on his head. And everyone kind of looking at her like, what are you doing? Why would you do that to Jesus? And it turns out it's a bottle, essentially like a bottle of perfume. It's an anointment. So she was anointing him in preparation for what was about to happen. And
what? Oh, let's pause there for a second. What do you mean what's about to happen?
So we are at the point where we know Jesus is about to be betrayed. Throughout, I guess if you haven't read, there are different prophecies that kind of repeat themselves as we go through history. And one of those prophecies is that someone will come down, from heaven to save everyone. And that when they do come down, they will essentially take on all of our sin to save us.
And Jesus has kind of reiterated those prophecies throughout. He's like, hey, just heads up, guys, I'm the Son of Man, and the Son of Man is going to die. So he knows, he's mentioned it a few times. I don't think his disciples quite get it, but that's what you're referring to.
Yes.
So there's something about, and I don't know if this woman, and I think her name is Mary. I think in one of the Gospels we get her name is Mary. I don't even know if she realizes what she's doing. Like, when I read this story, I just think, like, this is a really expensive perfume. She loves this guy who is raising people from the dead.
Right.
And she wants to, like, bless him and anoint him. That's, like, totally foreign to us. But that's like coming into interrupting someone's birthday party, like smashing Dior and just like dumping it on.
Right. No one was expecting it. All of a sudden this woman just walks up and she's like, here you go.
Yeah.
And I think Jesus knew, but it just seems so spontaneous to everyone else that it came by surprise. And then what surprised them even more was that it was an expensive bottle of perfume. So it's not just that she took a random bottle of your cheap $5 body spray
from Rue 21.
Right. No, this was like a Chanel No. 5
so I
perfume
think
that
actually
she poured.
The the value, I think, is like a year's wages. Is I think the way that they calculate it, because one of the disciples was like, what a waste. We could have sold that and given the money to the poor. But I think it's about a year's wages.
Yes.
Yeah, something crazy.
Yeah. And I believe they started chastising her and almost yelling at her. What are you doing? Why would you do this? And Jesus interrupts everybody and he said, hold on a second. This was supposed to happen. She is anointing me for what is about to come that I've already told you all about.
Mm-hmm. And then he does reiterate it there because I think he does say she's anointing me for my burial.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, man. Oh, and then he says, you're right. They're like kind of like scolding her. And he's like, you guys, whenever the gospel is told, this story of her is going to be a part of that.
Yes. Yes. He says her memory will be, when we retell the story, her memory will show up or will be present.
It's going to be part of the story.
Yes. She's going to be part of the story now,
okay.
Which I thought was interesting that we don't even know her name until
I think it's Mary.
Yes. What I thought was interesting was as you're reading about it in the Bible, all you hear is about this woman, and then finally you find out what her name was.
So that's really interesting because we weren't even going to start with that story, but you felt the need to, and that's a little coincidental and convenient that she's part of the story, just like Jesus prophesied she would be.
Right.
Okay, so then there's this awkward silence, right? And everyone doesn't know what to do and is waiting for Jesus. Fine. Okay, the party goes on, and the next day they're trying to make their way to Jerusalem. Okay, so Jesus is headed to Jerusalem. The disciples are like, we shouldn't go there because the Pharisees are furious and they're trying to kill you. Jesus says, I have to do this. So they make their way to Jerusalem. This is where we get the triumphal entry. I think this Sunday is actually Palm Sunday, which is the Sunday that they celebrate Jesus' entry into Jerusalem, waving palm fronds. Okay, he makes his way into Jerusalem. He's been there for a week. Lots of stuff happens. And then we get to Thursday night, I think. Yeah, Thursday night is when the Passover, the Jewish Passover, starts.
What I thought was interesting was the disciples were led there because Jesus said, hey, go look. You're going to go into town. You're going to look for someone carrying water. This person is going to lead you to the room that we're going to have our Last Supper. So it's not even, it wasn't a designated, like they didn't rent a banquet hall by any means. It was just someone's home who they happened to have the perfect setting for what he wanted to accomplish. And so up to this point, he's already told the disciples multiple times what is going to happen, and they still don't want to believe him.
His death, you mean?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So then this supper, I think when this supper started, do they even realize that this is the Last Supper?
Yeah, I mean, I can't imagine that they would. And I can't help but wonder if maybe part of the reason why they didn't get it is because Jesus often spoke in parables.
Yes.
So maybe they're thinking like Jesus is being cryptic and like being weird, and they're like, I just don't get what he's saying. So yeah, I mean, they got to have no clue.
Right.
This is, and I think according to the Bible, this is the third Passover meal that they've had. So they've been with Jesus for 3 years. This is the third Passover meal that they're going to have with him. Yeah, so they're just in some random, like, who is this guy? We don't even know whose house this is.
It's a person they've never seen before who's like, here, have supper here.
Right. Hey, water jug guy, we're going to have Passover at your house. And he's like, okay.
Right. Yeah.
Are you familiar with what, like, the Passover meal is and the holiday?
I'd say not very much.
So like in Egypt, you know, the 10 plagues, like the story of the
Yes.
Exodus.
Mm-hmm.
So the last plague is the death of the firstborn. And God says, if you sacrifice a lamb and paint the blood over the doorpost, the angel of death will pass over your house and protect you. So there's this like protective sacrifice that needs to be made in order for God's wrath to be avoided. Okay, so that's the celebration. They're remembering how God did this, and that's the Jewish holiday. Jesus and his disciples are up there remembering God's salvation, his power, the protective sacrifice. And it's just like beautiful picture of what's about to come. They're sitting there trying to enjoy this like celebratory meal, celebrating God's salvation and his power. And Jesus washes their feet. Like I've heard, you know, I've seen the meme and I've heard it like, oh, Jesus washes Judas's feet. Spoiler alert, Judas is the one that betrays
Right.
Jesus. But here's like, this is something that the Lord's kind of been like showing me, is that God is a foot washer. Like I feel almost like blasphemous saying that, but
Jesus was a servant, and he wants us to also be servants. It's not, we are not here. We're not here to just do good works and to check the boxes.
okay.
We're here to serve others and to be a servant of God, to do his will.
Well, and I think that it's so interesting that his will was to wash feet.
Right.
Like, have you ever washed a grown man's feet?
No. Feet
It's-
weird me out. I don't.
I'm sure the majority of people in the world
Right.
feel that way, right? So
Yeah.
I have washed a grown man's feet. Right? It's a little gross. It's a little embarrassing. And there's something about God that he wants us to know. That's part of who he, like, that's a quality he possesses.
Right. So one of the verses in Matthew was, for even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve others and to give his life as a ransom for many. So in this part, I feel like it's kind of talking about how he didn't come down so he could, Jesus not come down to earth so that he could be glorified. He came down to earth so that he could show us how we should be serving others. He didn't do it to be seen or to be known. He did it because he understood the seriousness of what God is commanding of us, and that he understood the seriousness of his command, which is that he was here to sacrifice his life to
Right.
save us.
And I think, so, and I just want to like, kind of like maybe fill in, because I think he did come and do this to be known. Because I think it is like I want you to know this about me. Like
Yes.
I am humble, and I am, like, he doesn't have to be humble. He's God. Right.
Right.
But he's like, I want you to know this about me. And like, it's interesting that you say like, he didn't come, I think what you mean when you say he didn't come to be glorified, like he didn't come to be treated like a rock star.
Right. He didn't come to be treated like a king, or
Yeah.
I'm here so that you guys can worship me. Yes, we do need to worship God, but he wants us to know that just being servants to his will, that's all he's asking for. He loves us so much that
He would do that.
he would even do that.
Man. Okay, so he's washing all the disciples' feet. He dries all their feet. He actually gets to Peter. Do you remember what happens when he gets to Peter?
I do not.
Peter says, "Oh, nay, you're not washing my feet." And Jesus says, "Bro, if I don't wash your feet, you can't have any part of me. Like, you have to let me serve you," which is, again, I feel a little bit blasphemous saying that, but Jesus is saying, like, you have to let me serve you. You
Right.
have to let me do this embarrassing, humiliating thing in your life. Hang on, something's like
Well,
wrecking
so
me right now.
isn't that just that was his sacrifice? He's saying you have to let me do this, because by letting me do this, I am saving all of you.
Whoa.
And so this whole time, Peter's not getting that. Peter's not understanding what he's saying. He's not understanding, no, really, I have to die for all of you. Even washing his feet, I don't want you to wash my feet. And he says, no, you have to let me do this.
Wow. Okay. And then Peter's like, okay, then not my whole feet, or not my feet, my whole body. And Jesus is like, okay, you're missing the point here.
Hold on a second.
Right. I just need to wash your feet. And there's a whole lot of other stuff behind it, but okay. But he also, it doesn't explicitly say this, but if he washes all the disciples' feet, he washed Judas's feet. This is the same guy who was bitching about the perfume.
Yes.
He's the one who said, how come we didn't sell this and give the money to the poor? Like, he's just totally missing the point here. And Jesus knows Judas is going to betray him. In fact, he says, by the way, BT dubs, one of you is going to betray me. And he kind of like does like the sneaky wink at Judas. I know it's you, bro. And he washes his feet anyway.
Right.
Man.
During the meal, they're all, of course, eating, celebrating Passover. And he stands up. Of course, he has a loaf of bread. And he says, hey, I want to break this for you guys. This is my flesh. I want you to eat this for me. And then he also has wine. And of course, most people have heard this part of it at least, but drink the wine, do this in memory of me.
Mm-hmm.
This is how I will stay with all of you. And I think even then they still don't quite understand the significance of that. They're looking at him thinking, okay, why are we eating this? Yes, we're eating already. Why is it important that this bread is being broken and given to all of us?
Like, in conjunction with him saying, man, what did you just say? Because I don't think I've ever heard it put that way before. You said to remember that I'm with you. What did you say?
Said, do this in memory of me, to remember that I'm always with you.
Wow. Yeah. Okay, so the traditional view of the Passover bread and the wine is the bread is unleavened. So there's no yeast in it, so it's flat bread. The point of that, it's supposed to be that way. The point of it is, when God was going to deliver Israel out of Egypt, he said, you don't have time to let it rise, because as soon as I deliver you, it's going to be immediate. It's going to be complete, and it's going to be immediate. You won't have time to like get a full loaf, flatbread only. And so there's this like connection with Jesus's body. What he's doing in the flesh is going to be as immediate and complete as the deliverance and salvation of the Israelites from Exodus. And the wine was symbolic of the lamb's blood, right? And so he's like taking these emblems and he's saying, these things that you remember God's salvation and his deliverance from Egypt, we're going to translate those into God's complete salvation of like eternal spiritual salvation. It's immediate, it's complete, and it's done through my blood. Eat this and drink this to remember me. And I love what you said, to remember that I'm with you.
After the Last Supper, that is when he takes three of his disciples and asks them to come out with him to
the Garden of Gethsemane.
Yes.
So
Yes.
he actually takes all 11 to the garden, but then he takes 3 like a little bit more further. Because
okay.
that's
Right.
the part where Judas, that is like, oh, I know Jesus is going to take everybody to his secret little prayer garden. I'm going to go get the priests and lead them to his secret hiding spot.
Yes.
So that's when they kind of separate. Judas goes to the priests to betray Jesus. Jesus takes the other 11 to like the campfire area. And then he takes James,
Peter,
and John.
Yes.
And he takes those three a little bit further to have like a little private prayer time.
So then he takes the three there and he says, okay, I want you guys to hang here.
Mm-hmm.
I am going to go off on my own to pray.
Yep.
But please stay on guard. So he's telling them to stay awake. I'm going to go off on my own and pray. Please stay awake and alert. So he goes off to pray on his own. And there are a couple interesting things that happened here. He goes off to pray on his own and essentially he comes back once and they're all asleep. Yeah. And he says, come on, guys, why?
Yeah.
You guys all fell asleep. Well, we're sorry. We'll stay awake this time. Right. He's like, okay. And he goes and prays for a second time. Comes back. They're asleep again. He's like, seriously? You're going to fall asleep? And they're like, I'm sorry. I promise we'll stay awake. Goes and prays for a third time and then comes back and they're still asleep.
Yeah.
So there's 3 different times where he's come back to check on them, which I think is very intentional that he is checking to see if they are on guard.
Why?
I think because of the reason, I think part of it is because of the reason that he was praying, which is the other interesting part for me.
Okay.
So when he goes off to pray on his own, through Jesus' life, he prayed a lot on his own with God. That was his time with him. These 3 times, though, knowing what he had to do and what he had to sacrifice to save us, he still went to God and said, please, if there's any other way that we can save them that does not involve what I have to do, please tell me what it is. I will do something else.
Please, anything.
Which kind of showed his human side. He still doesn't, he didn't want to suffer. He was still, not that he didn't want to, but he experienced the human side of suffering. Like, I don't want to do this, but if you need me to, I will. And so he specifically says, it will be your will that I do this. Okay.
I don't want to derail you, but you said a couple things that I'm like really interested in. Wow. Like, as you say this, honestly, for the first time, like I'm thinking about this, Jesus is saying, I don't want to go through this. If the Bible is correct and true, Jesus never sinned. Right?
Right.
So he has no idea. Like, when I sin, I'm like, oh, damn it. I screwed up again. God, I'm sorry. Right. Jesus has never had to feel that, like, disjointed relationship. He's always had a perfect relationship with the Father. He's about to experience the full consequence of everyone's sin throughout history.
Right.
And he's never, ever experienced even a hint of what sin does to your relationship with God.
Right. And I can't imagine how overwhelming that feeling has to be, knowing how much suffering truly has to happen in order to save us all. And even as he's praying for that and saying, God, if there's any way that we can avoid this, please tell me. In that same sentence, he says, but I will do your will.
Yeah. I think if we go back to, you made an interesting comment, again, that I'd never thought about. He said to the 3 friends that he brought with him, he said, stay on guard. Mm-hmm. Like, even that is like, to me, shows, and maybe I'm misunderstanding what he's trying to say there, but he's like, I'm terrified of what's coming. And I don't, like, it's like you have your teddy bear set up at the edge of the bed to protect you from the boogie monster, right? Like, right. I don't let this come to me. Protect me from this. Almost like I want that extra layer of, wow.
And for me, part of the interesting piece of that, when he says be on guard and he comes back to check on them, to me, it almost illustrates the importance of prayer. How important it is to pray and to be able to have those conversations. And I almost, my own dumb Christian mind is wondering, did he want them to be on guard so that they would also pray in their own way?
For sure. I'm sure hoping like, come on guys, ask for the same thing. Like, let's together, let's all pray that there's something else that can be done.
Right.
He comes back 3 times and he's like, all right, well, I guess
we're done here.
Yeah, I guess this is what's happening. I asked God for another route. He said no.
Right.
Oh, by the way, and he looks out into the trees, and here comes this crowd with torches and pitchforks and like armed guards. Yeah. Okay, I guess this is what we're doing.
Yeah. He even calls them out and says, how many times have I taught in the temple and you could have arrested me then, and you're choosing right now? But then he ends it by saying, so the scriptures have been fulfilled.
Whoa.
So it's calling them out, but it's also still proving his point of, you guys are still, as hard as you all are trying to not follow the prophecy, you are still fulfilling the prophecy exactly as it was written and as it was told.
You guys are like upset because I'm claiming to be the one that God promised. You guys are like, oh, wow. Yeah. You guys have done everything you can to undermine, but all you're doing is actually fulfilling.
Right.
Wow.
And your efforts to undermine what is happening, you are just fulfilling what is happening. So go ahead, do what you want. Just know that I'm right.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So
all right, so then Peter freaks out, cuts off a guy's ear. Jesus says, slow your roll, heals the guy's ear. And Jesus is like, okay, you can take me. All of his disciples run away.
Yes, they all flee.
This is like in the middle of the night.
Right.
Thursday night.
Yes.
It's like when, the U.S. Senate meets at like midnight, right? Nobody knows what's happening. That you find out the next day. Oh, by the way, we passed this bill. What?
Yeah.
That's kind of what's happening here.
That is exactly what's happening.
They're trying to like be sneaky and do this so that nobody knows. And what I find really interesting is they actually don't take him to the high priest who's in charge. They take Jesus to the father or the father-in-law. It's father of the high priest. I don't remember his name. But they're like, it's almost like they're knowingly subverting their legal system in order to do what they want. Because for some reason, this guy has more pull, even though he's not the technical high priest, like he's more influential in the community or whatever. And they're like, hey, maybe we can get this guy on our side and then he'll have some influence in the way we want this to go. And here's what I think is really interesting. Maybe you have some thoughts on this, but they're asking him, they're actually trying to get 2 people to agree on an accusation of Jesus.
Yes.
But they can't.
Right.
They have 2 people who say similar stories, but according to the Jewish law, they have to have 2 witnesses that verify the same accusation before they can actually technically hold a legal counsel. They can't.
Right.
And so Jesus openly says, and he actually quotes Daniel, and he says, I'm the Son of Man coming on the clouds. And that's a quote from Daniel where they are talking about God. And Jesus in that moment declares, by quoting Daniel, I am God. So they can't do this. And Jesus is like, all right, we're running out of time here. If I don't help these guys along, this whole death thing isn't going to happen. They're not going to. So here's a little boost to help you guys along. And I just think that's so amazing because he could have just remained silent and their whole plan would have been screwed up.
Yeah. But he said that specific statement, and that's when they said, there you go. That's blasphemy.
Yep.
Now what are you going to do?
Right. So then they take him to...
But then he becomes silent.
Right.
They ask him about his charges. I think, was it Pilate?
Mm-hmm.
He even tried He even tried to let him defend himself. All these charges are against you. What are you going to say?
So technically, according to the Jewish law, blasphemy is the death sentence.
Right.
But they're under Roman rule, so they legally can't kill anybody without Roman approval. So they then have to take Jesus to Pilate, who is the Roman governor, and they say, hey, Pilate, according to our law, he's supposed to die. Will you give us permission? And that's when Pilate's like,
yes.
Yeah, interrogating him and stuff.
Yes. And Pilate is almost trying to help him in whatever way he can, but Jesus remains silent the whole time.
Why do you think that is?
I think because he knew that if he spoke up, Pilate would find a way to allow him to live, and that couldn't happen. Because Pilate even said, you are really going to remain silent after all these charges, and he didn't say a word.
Yeah. The crowd is trying to crucify Jesus.
Right.
And it's Jewish custom for Pilate to release a prisoner. And Pilate is trying to release Jesus. So I don't think Barabbas was going to be crucified, but Pilate picks Barabbas in hopes that they'll want to free Jesus because
instead,
Barabbas is a real asshole.
Right.
Yeah.
And then I believe that's the point where, is it the high priest that go around and they get the crowd all riled up and no, we want Barabbas to be released. Jesus has to stay here. So, and as Pilate is trying to convince them that Barabbas should be the one that stays,
and Jesus is released,
the high priests are going around and they're like whispering to the crowd
and that's a really like, okay, what's going on there? Because if it weren't for the high priests, and that just makes me think, like, how easy is it for, like, the people held in, like, religious high esteem? How easy is it for them to, like, convince people, oh, no, you should think about it this way. You should definitely, like, and they're like, okay, I guess we should kill this guy.
Well, and especially, I believe in that time, you didn't question high priests, elders of the church. That was just not something that you did. If they said something, you agreed with it.
Yeah, so they're shouting loudly. Pilate is afraid that they're gonna do, like, a riot and burn Target. So he says, okay, I'll let you. I'll free this criminal, this horrible criminal Barabbas.
Right.
And we'll kill this innocent guy just to get you guys to calm down. Right.
But then he also makes the comment, okay, I will do as you guys have told me.
Right.
So he doesn't want to take any responsibility for the choice that was made.
He has Jesus beaten to a pulp. He makes Jesus carry these large wooden beams, and some scholars say maybe it was just the crossbar. Some scholars say it was the crossbar and the post. So anywhere from 100 to 350 pounds after he's been just tortured. He's dragging this, and it's probably a used cross, right? So it's splintery and it has somebody else's blood all over it, and he's carrying it through the city. One gospel says that a guy, I don't remember his name, Simon of Cyrene maybe.
Yes.
Helps him carry, but they get the cross up to Golgotha.
Yes, Golgotha. I'm trying to remember the towns.
That's all right. I'm rambling, so I'm trying to pass it off to you.
Well, so another point that I found interesting, because I feel like I'm learning all this for the first time. Anyone who knows about God or Christianity, you hear the very quick summary. Yes, Jesus came down. He was crucified, died for our sins, tortured, yada, yada, yada. Yeah. That's the very quick summary of what you get.
Right.
Reading it and truly beginning to understand it, though, when even before they gave him the wooden beams to carry, they made him put on a purple robe.
Mm-hmm.
They gave him a crown of thorns, and they allowed people to beat him, spit on him, mock him. And then after that, they made him put on his old garments again and then drag the wood. So as he's dragging this wooden beam, however many miles he had to go,
Right.
he is dragging this wooden beam. He's all bloodied up. He's weak. Probably hasn't eaten. And he's
Since
wearing
the Last Supper.
Since the Last Supper,
Yeah.
right? So he hasn't eaten, and they're making him carry these wooden beams in his garments that have probably been torn up, crown of thorns. I mean, just having that image of watching him have to do that
and he's
in front of everybody.
well, okay, so you said they put his clothes back on. At some point, I'm pretty sure he's naked. Maybe
Yes.
it's not until he's on the cross.
I
But
believe it's on the cross because they tore off his garments at that point, and then he had to watch them split his garments up.
that's
Like,
right, that's
who's
right.
going to take this? Who gets this? He had to watch them essentially take his
gamble for his clothes.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
So when they put him up on the cross, he actually had two people, one on either side of him, two robbers. And what I also thought was interesting was as everyone else is mocking him, even the robbers are I mean,
right.
they're both up on crosses with him. They're right next to him, and they're mocking him and they're insulting him, and
Even in death, like
right.
there's something about spitting on Jesus that seems enticing to the human being.
Yes.
Wow. His mom is watching.
Yes,
His mom is there.
it was Mary Magdalene, and then Mary, the mother of two of the disciples, because they were both I believe they were both there together. They had followed.
Yeah, I know
him.
there's Jesus' mom, Mary Magdalene, and another lady.
Another Mary.
And she's just watching him. Mm-hmm. And like, it makes me think of, when Jesus is born, Mary meets a priest named Simeon, I think. And Simeon says, "Oh man, this is a great blessing, but there's something about this kid that's just going to like kill your soul." I think he says he'll pierce your heart. You'll suffer. Like, this guy is going to save people, but you mom are also going to really suffer.
Right. One, and I don't know if we want to press into this very much, but another point I found interesting was when he was on the cross. It was right before he died. He did. It says that he cried out to God, and he said, my God, why have you forsaken me?"
Yeah.
And to me, I always found that significant because at one point, in order for him to truly take on all of our sin in order to save us, God had to turn his back on him.
Yeah.
He had to turn his back on his son after he already sent him down here, knowing what he would have to go through. Then he had to turn his back on him and just allow him to feel all that sin.
Yeah, because Paul says in 2 Corinthians 5:21, he says, Jesus became sin
Yes.
in that moment.
Yes.
Wow. So that people could return to the family of God. Like,
Right.
without Jesus doing this, there is no way for people to have an eternal right relationship with the Father.
Right.
He's not on the cross for very long. You die from suffocation. But he's been so tortured, he doesn't have the strength to like hoist himself up, pull himself up on the nails to breathe, because that's when hanging with your arms up actually compresses your lungs, so you have to pull up to release your lungs so you can breathe.
Right.
And then you drop. He's just so exhausted. It doesn't take him very long to die. Oh, what I was going to say is when he's walking through the streets, it's like the sun is just starting to rise.
Yes.
Right. So it's been like all night. We're getting into Friday. He's nailed to a cross sometime Friday morning.
I want to say they said it was at the 6th hour.
I don't know what that means because it's not 6 a.m. I think they measure time by like how many hours the sun has been up.
Okay.
I'm not sure.
Okay.
But it's something like that. So he's on the cross. He dies, and this is really important because the Jewish Sabbath starts sundown Friday night. According to the Jewish law, you can't do any work on the Sabbath. And it starts sundown Friday night. So they're like, well, we got to get him down quick. They find out he's dead. Okay, let's get his body down so that we can't do anything on the Sabbath.
Right.
And then a guy named Joseph of Arimathea, he asks Pilate for Jesus's body because he was not one of the apostles, but he was a follower of Jesus.
Right.
And they put him in a new tomb. John's gospel makes a really important note, and I think it's important to note. John says, they saw the tomb, they knew where it was, because later people are going to come up with these excuses. Oh, the apostles got the tomb wrong when they get to an empty tomb. Oh, they just went to the wrong tomb. John makes a note. No, we know it. We saw it.
Right.
This guy's rich. He knew which tomb it was. They put a giant stone in front of the tomb with guards.
Right. And they do that because Jesus had already told them that in 3 days he would rise. He'd be risen. And so they sealed the tomb and had guards there because they wanted to make sure that did not happen. Otherwise, he would have been right this whole time.
Well, they wanted, yes, but they also wanted to make sure nobody faked a resurrection.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Stole his body and claimed he raised from the dead.
Yes.
But the thing about this, that's it. Jesus is dead.
Yes.
He's not he didn't faint. He is dead. And his disciples who have been following him for 3 years have to go home and they have to eat because the Passover is a week long. So every night for a week, they're eating the Passover meal. They just ate the Passover meal with Jesus last night. All of this crazy shit happens. Now they go home and they have to eat the Passover meal again. And oh my gosh. And I just got chills because what you said was eat this bread and drink this wine to remember that I'm with you.
Mm-hmm.
Whoa. And can you imagine what they're
right.
I'm not hungry. And they just keep having these flashbacks to when he broke the bread. Eat this, do this in remembrance of me. And they're like, oh man, I can't imagine what that was like that night.
Right.